Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world and wherever you are listening. We're also on audio, so we're on iTunes, Spotify, and all the other podcast things that are out there. There's a lot of them, I know, I've heard. And you're very welcome today. I've got a very special guest. I actually got the wrong time, all these time differences around the world. So I was an hour ahead. So I thought there was 7 hours difference, but no, there's 8 hours difference. So I made the mistake. That's one of the things that leaders should be doing, is owning up for their mistakes. And that's one thing that I did just now. So I'm your host, Jason Cooper. I'm a sales strategist, sales coach. I help invest in sales teams to deliver better results by sales training coaching. So this series is all about insightful leadership. It's all about gifted leaders who employ brilliant and unusual strategies to great effect. And my awesome guest today that I've been connected to on LinkedIn for a number of years, and it was done through a friend of mine, and I'm really excited to speak with Spike Humor. Is that how you pronounce your surname?
It is. Yeah, like humor, like funny, but with an O instead, or with an E instead of an O.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Very good. Very good. So a little bit about you. I've done a little bit of research. So if I don't get it completely correct, don't shoot me. I'll put my hand up. I'll make sure I put it in. So you're widely recognized as a thought leader, world-renowned expert in leading and inspiring companies, organizations, and individuals to achieve more and more. He's called the mentor's mentor, which is really super cool, really. So a mixture of marketing strategists and performance accelerators. Spike serves as trusted advisors to performance consultant entrepreneurs around the world. He's got some 10-day turnaround methodologies, which I'm interested to hear, and rapid success technologies, an overnight entrepreneur. And he also has a book. Do you have one book, or do you have 2 books, or 3 or 4?
Well, actually, I have a number of books, but the primary one is the 10-day turnaround for business.
Awesome. And that's probably going to be on my bucket list as well to listen to. So you're also in personal development, spiritual alignment. I'd like to hear about that. And then you're into NLP, high performance, and all of that. So similar to me in number of respects. I've done tons of that and bucket loads. So welcome again. Thank you very much for joining me. And I'm very excited, as always.
Glad to be here. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So tell me about, before you got into what you are doing now, just jump along to some sort of anchor points that really got you into where you are now, and what sort of inspired you to what you're doing.
Well, my background initially was in manufacturing management, and so I learned a lot about efficiencies and effectiveness and leadership, being able to align groups of people and diverse interests and diverse communities, and being able to create an outcome through manufacturing processes. And that goes back probably about 30 years. But over the years, I've had a lot of opportunities to be exposed to people who have different leadership styles in different industries, going the whole way back to when I was a child. My mom, for the most part, was a divorced mom, raising kids. So she had to be the nurturer, the leader, the provider, the disciplinarian, and the whole shebang. And so, of all the people that I've been around, I probably learned the most about leadership from my mom, and then ultimately my mom's husband, who came along later, who was a very hardworking man and taught me a lot about how to leverage the efforts of other people for a common goal, because he was in the wrecking business, where we tear down homes and do demolition and things, and we got paid by the job. And so the more you could align the efforts of everyone to the outcome, the more effective you were in getting things done, and the more well compensated you were, since you got paid by the job. Didn't matter if it took you 2 weeks or 2 years. And so it really became apparent that if you had the ability to lead, guide, direct, motivate, reward, incentivize people for not just for your own interest, but align their interest with the overall interest of the enterprise, you could be effective, from a leadership standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint and an outcome standpoint. And then from there, I learned, as I learned about efficiencies and effectiveness, I got into my own journey of personal growth and that path of trying to enhance my own performance, personally, professionally, in other ways. And then from that, I started taking a lot of things that I learned there and applying it to small business consulting. And then through a host of circumstances, I got into doing small business turnarounds, which, a lot of times when you're in the turnaround business, you have not a lot of runway, and you have to be able to get a result pretty quickly, because generally they're bringing you in when things are not running smoothly. And so it's times of uncertainty for the employees. It's time of frustration for creditors and customers and everything else. And so being able to figure out what are the leverage points in a short period of time that can shift the direction of an organization, of a team, or even individuals or yourself was really an essential part of what I was doing. But after a period of years of doing turnarounds and going into companies that were already messed up, I realized that there were certain principles that you could apply, that if you did those things in advance, you wouldn't be forced to change. You could actually choose the time and direction of your change, which really I think is part of effective leadership, being able to craft a vision and being able to do things in advance of when you're forced to do them, and do them in a nature and in a timing that serves you, serves the organization, and serves your values.
So tell me a bit about that, because I'm intrigued by the process that you do. So just imagine me, I was sort of a business owner or a client of yours. What would be the sort of the normal organic steps, just so it'd be good for the listeners to sort of understand a different approach from an expert like yourself?
Yeah. Well, no, and thank you, Jason. That's a great question. And it's funny, because I think as a turnaround consultant, and I think as a leader, one of the skills that are essential is to be able to take a complex situation or a cloudy situation and turn it into something that is clear, something that's concise, and something that people can have a degree of confidence and certainty in, especially in uncertain times. And so, believe it or not, there were a number of reasons, and unless there was a natural disaster, a pandemic, regulatory issues or legal issues, most companies didn't get into trouble overnight. They got into trouble over time. It was because they, in many cases, they drifted away, or they didn't pay attention to the right things. And so I developed a very, very simple process, and I use this for hardcore turnarounds, and I use it today for performance enhancement with organizations. And the acronym is ASIA, right? And it seems pretty simple, but it's 4 steps. The first one is that you went in, we would do an assessment. And the reason why I chose 10 days is that in the very, very beginning, you generally had about 2 weeks to get your hands around things in terms of where they are. And you had to get some kind of a plan in place and get things moving, because things generally got worse, not better, over time. And so we'd go in and we'd do an assessment, which was the A in Asia. And then, as part of that assessment, we'd figure out where the company was, where they wanted to go, and we'd identify the gaps that existed between the two. And then we would develop a strategy. Whatever the strategy happened to be, depending on the resources, depending on the timeframes, depending on the organization, the people, the talents inside, access to other resources, we would develop a strategy that would ultimately translate into the tactical implementation of the steps that were necessary to take that strategy and turn it into something tangible, which was the implementation, the I in Asia. And then from that, and which was probably the most important one, was the final A in the Asia formula, which was being able to have a system of assessment that says, are you on track? Are you staying on track? Do you need to make another choice or make another decision and take other actions, so that you didn't go back to where you were, but also that you knew on a measured basis that you were making progress in the direction in which you needed. And so it worked very, very well for organizations that were in trouble, but it worked even better when I started working with the same formula and working with companies that were already doing quite well but wanted to do better, or they were in a situation where they started their business for a certain intention or a certain outcome, and they were doing okay, but either perhaps the business wasn't fulfilling their personal values, or it wasn't meeting their needs for their lifestyle, their financial situations, or they weren't contributing at the level or in the ways that were motivating and important to them and inspiring to the people in the organizations. And so the formula works in both scenarios.
That's really interesting. I like that scenario. So what do you think leaders are sort of facing, really? So like everyone, like at the end of the day, everyone wants sales. So what do you think that the top leaders can do and approach their team leaders, their sales managers, their sales directors, and convey a message down that builds up trust, respect, authority, authenticity? Because I think I know that word is a big buzzword at the moment, as we all know, but I think it's really for them to be themselves in a respected way. What do you think an approach might work for them?
Well, I think one of the big things, and I think authenticity certainly is a big part of it, but I think transparency, and consistency. If you're not transparent as a leader and people don't understand your motivations or your approach, especially in times of uncertainty, whether they be economic, whether they be societal, or whether they just be specific to your business, if people can't understand and appreciate or have confidence that what you're doing is really what you're doing on a consistent basis, or what you're saying is consistent and transparent to how it affects them. I think being straight with people is one of the most important things you can do. And I'll give you a great example. About 25 years ago, I was consulting with a company, and then ultimately they asked me to come in and to take over the role as the CEO. And the company was in desperate straits. And one of the first things that I did is that I brought the senior management team together, and I just said, look, here's where we are. We have about 2 weeks worth of runway here. And, and this is what it's going to take. We're not in a position where the senior executives can be paid at least for 30 days, maybe 60 or 90. And I just ask everyone at the end of that is like, just let me know if this is something that you can sign up for. And if you can't, it's okay, right? You can stay as long as you can contribute, and you can try to find a way to transition. But if this doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve the company. And I need everyone in the room to go around and raise their hand for everyone else, not for me, to say that they were willing to do whatever it took within reason, as long as it wasn't dangerous, immoral, illegal, or unethical. And all but one person stayed. And it was a team of about 12 senior managers or senior leaders. And the one person came to me and just said, look, I can't do it. I have 2 young children. My wife doesn't work. And I can't take this uncertainty. I'm going to have to, find something as quickly as possible. And so I think, being able to share with people, number one, where the company is, number two, what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and how it affects and how it benefits them. And sometimes, people think people often, Jason, I think, confuse authority with leadership.
Yeah.
Right? You can be in a position of leadership and have no authority. Now, it doesn't mean you're effective. Doesn't mean that you have the same the same ability to influence things directly through delegation or assignment. But at the same time, just because you have a position, it doesn't mean that you're a leader. And sometimes people rely on their title. And when I go into an organization and someone says, well, hey, that's the way it is because I'm a supervisor, I'm a manager, I'm a senior executive. I think the first time that someone has to lean on their position or title in order to try to get people to do things, that they've lost the largest part of their ability to lead.
Yeah. How would you deal with that situation then? If they've been given this title, but they're not really a leader, what would you do to help them and sort of coach them through this? Maybe it's not the right job for them, but maybe it is, and they haven't got their sort of inner whatever their inner spirit to actually do it. How would you approach that situation?
Well, the first thing, and this goes back to Stephen Covey and his books on the 7 habits. The first one is to seek first understand, right? Because it could be something I'm missing. It could be that perhaps I wasn't aware of something, or it could be that they had a different perspective about what we were trying to do, or they had a different approach. And so if I can understand what they were attempting to do, I could give them input and hopefully suggestions and some guidance on perhaps how to do it more effectively or to do it a different way. But ultimately, the results will speak for themselves. And I think, being able to have a clear indication of how you measure success. For some people, it's just financial. Some people, it's just transactional. Some people, it's more contributive, where they want to be able to have a bigger impact on something perhaps outside the organization, whether it be their customer base, their community, society, whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. And I think if people understand what the higher purpose is, a lot of times it's easier for people to see the why. Now, there's a big difference between seeing the why for the company and the why for the organization, as opposed to the why for yourself. Now, you're an NLP guy, and so you understand that one of the things that you can do is by being able to chunk up the conversation about the outcomes, and being able to take some of the intangible things and turn it into tangible steps that allows people to really take the things that are important to them and hopefully lead and guide things to and through other people by figuring out what's important to them. One of my early mentors in business said something to me. I think I was about 19 years old, and he called me in, and I just gotten a low-level managerial job. I was a lead person, wasn't a manager, wasn't quite a supervisor. And he said, Spike, as you become a leader and as you move forward and as you grow in your career, always remember, that don't ask someone to do something for you without giving them an opportunity to serve their own values. Right? If someone's doing something to serve you at the expense of their values, even if they don't, object, even if they don't push back, at some point in time, they're not being as effective trying to serve your values if they're not serving their own, but they certainly won't serve your values long term at the expense of their own. And so just being able to see what's in it for other people and how what they're trying to accomplish in their life, their business, their career, whatever, and how you can align those efforts into getting the same things for other people, through other people, and for the organization in general. I think, to me, outcome can really break the logjam of argument and conversation, because either you're effective or you're not. You're getting results or you're not. And so it doesn't mean you're wrong. Doesn't mean that you're to blame. But ultimately, we get measured and rewarded based on the results that we deliver. And as leaders, it's our obligation to be able to leverage the resources ethically and honestly that we have around us, including people's time and talent, to get that outcome. But it can't be at the expense of everyone to serve only one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I understand that. And I do agree that you have to almost step inside someone else's shoes to see it from their point of view and understand their beliefs, their values, and maybe sort of chunk up a little bit more to see the values of the company and the other people around it and the teams around it, to find out what they do as well. Someone told me, I was chatting with another guy the other week, and basically what he does when he goes into an organization, he speaks to the receptionist, and he then goes to speak to the salespeople and gets the different holistic point of view of what is actually going on within the company. So he can probably get a helicopter view before he actually goes to see senior management. Have you ever sort of experienced a time where you get really sort of at the end of it, you go, there's something not quite right here. The senior management are actually telling me this, but in reality, this is happening.
Sure.
So there's no connection there.
Yeah, and frankly, Jason, especially in turnaround, especially in tumultuous times, that's more often the case than not, right? I mean, and so part of my role coming into an organization, whether it be a consultant, a coach, a resource, because I operate in a number of capacities, is to challenge the assumptions that people have, right? And sometimes challenge the self-imposed delusions that we all have, right? I mean, we distort things sometimes to try to eliminate conflict within ourselves or in the organization. And in fact, you lead organizations and teach people how to leverage sales efforts and sales resources. And almost invariably, when I would go into organizations, I would say, okay, well, let's take a look at your revenue numbers. Let's start to dig into where your revenue is being driven from, where your profits, where your margins are, the financial, mechanical stuff. And almost without exception, when I'd say, okay, well, show me your sales numbers for the last quarter, people would say, okay, well, last quarter was a bad quarter. Let me show you another quarter. I'd say, well, no, I want to see the last quarter. They say, well, no. We had our best salesperson on vacation, so that's not indicative of where we really are. And they'd pull out a binder back then, before we had everything digitized, and they would show me their numbers from the best quarter 5 years ago. But that's not today's reality. But for a lot of people, it made them feel better because it gave them a sense of possibility, because they know it was possible. It happened once before. But the reality is that where they were operating in the moment was not where they were 5 years ago. And so getting people sometimes to challenge the things that are comfortable with dysfunctional beliefs about where they are isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. And you can do it in a very respectful, but you have to do it in a very candid way, so that you're not just putting window dressing on it. I try to be as candid as I can with people. I always do my best to be respectful, but at the end of the day, I can't be, and I don't think a leader can be party to a delusion or party to a process that is deceiving our perceptions or deceiving our realities in terms of what we do, because we can't make a change if we can't acknowledge where we are.
Yeah, and that does happen sometimes. Maybe it's the senior leader might be just slightly deluded into thinking that everything's great and wonderful, but in reality, without sales coming through and hiding a month or quarter because someone else was away, I think that's ridiculous, and that's an area that needs to be looked at right now, as we understand. Look, as we're into sort of a challenging time and flipping the question over, like the world is a little bit challenging at the moment. What do you think is? I know you're in Las Vegas. How are things over there? I know we spoke a little bit beforehand. I'm sure the listeners want to find out, because it's usually a quite thriving city, full of a lot of glamour, lots of glitz, and lots of. How do you think the casinos and the leaders over there are facing things right now?
Well, it's one of those things, Jason, and again, I mean, it's not exclusive to Las Vegas, it's not exclusive to the gaming industry, but
Yep.
Las Vegas itself, is driven in large part by gaming, entertainment, and those types of things. It's becoming more diversified in the last 4 years since I've been here, but ultimately, without shows, without conventions, without nightclubs and those types of things, I mean, you're affecting about 70% of the state's revenue because in some form or fashion, whether it be someone parking cars or someone in the casino or someone renting a car or a restaurant or whatever, that revenue is being driven by gaming and entertainment. And so it's been difficult for people because a lot of people have, operated in the casino business and in the casino industry or the gaming industry that, it's an infinite supply, and sometimes it may, ride waves of the economy, but generally if it's slow this year, it'll pick up next year. Or if it's slow with people coming from the US, you have people coming from Asia, you have people coming from Australia, Europe that are coming because the dollars, down or something like that, and they have the ability to stay less expensively. So it's been in transition. But I will say this, Vegas is a fairly transient city in my experience. There's a lot more people who've moved here than were born and raised here, and so as we started facing economic uncertainties, and certainly with some of the fear and discomfort around the whole pandemic situation, the community came together a lot more than perhaps it has over the years, because people realized that if we're going to be part of a community, if we're going to stay here, there's certain things that we need to participate in that can help in the transition. And so, it's been difficult, probably, in almost every city, in almost every country. But as far as U.S. cities, Vegas has been very, very unique because it's overly dependent on one leg of a stool. And if you start to cut that leg off, the stool starts to wobble even more. So it's definitely been different.
So what do you think? How do you think leaders are sort of finding success out of this place where we are right now? I know a lot of companies have pivoted. A lot of companies have gone, well, I'm doing this now. Everything's online. Everything's doing this and that. What other challenges have? I know you face challenges because you probably fly around the world and do this, that, and the other, and that's maybe limited you. But how have you pivoted in this situation?
Well, I'll share with you two obvious ones, and I don't choose these because they're obvious. I choose them because I think they're object examples of how people who respond rapidly and effectively and think a little bit differently can be successful. And one of them is, we were talking earlier about where you're located. They close the pubs and the restaurants now unless they have outdoor seating. And so we just got back from California last night, and the county that we were in is north of San Francisco. But in that county, they can't have. It's just like where you're at. You can't have any indoor seating, and so parking lots now have become the overflow or the cafe for the restaurants. And so what they've done is that they have walk-up things. For some cities, what they've done is that they've shut off streets and they've created tents and stands where people can go in restaurants, whether they be through food trucks or other things. You can sit down in an outdoor area. So people have come together, I think, in a much more communal way than they might have in restaurants. But also the restaurants that were in that situation were forced to change, not because they were bad managers or because they weren't good leaders. They were faced with something that there was no real way to anticipate the impact on their business. Yeah. But the other one is it's just the fact that people were doing things remotely. I mean, I'd say 70 to 75% of what I do electronically anyway. I do it through a Zoom meeting, do it through teleconferences or whatever, and have been for years. But there are a lot of people and a lot of businesses that I've worked with that said, well, it would never work not having our employees here. It would never work being able to have a consult on a Zoom meeting versus having someone walk around and talk to all my people. And I think people are realizing that there's a difference between a preference and a necessity. And when you're forced sometimes to do things differently, you can't do the same thing, or you can't do different things the same way because you're doing something different. If it means that in order to be able to communicate more effectively with someone through a teleconference or through a Zoom meeting, there may be certain things that you have to accommodate differently, right? By making sure that everybody has access to the computers that they need in order to be able to have a video conference, or making sure that people have the ability to set a schedule in advance because they may have other types of things that they need to do. With children being homeschooled and things like that, it's not always easy for people to have the same 9 to 5 schedule that they might have had before. And so I think effective leaders have embraced that and said, look, it is what it is, and let's figure out the best way we can do with the the best thing we can do given what we're dealing with. And a lot of people that I talk to now, realize that the fact that they made everybody come to the office Monday through Friday, and they had 50 different offices, now all of a sudden maybe they don't need a building, right? Or
it is a big challenge actually. And I know over here, like Google got a massive complex over here with 3,000 or 4,000 people here, and they just built something else. We have Facebook, LinkedIn, and all of those companies. And I know Salesforce had just built or building this tower. Do they actually need it now? I don't know. And I think there's an element when it initially started was trust. And that's probably the biggest thing. Can we trust our employees to do their work now remotely? And I'm not sure whether that's whether the leaders are some of them, because they like to see the people in front of them.
Sure.
How is that translating now? And from your perspective, what are you seeing?
Well, it's funny. I mean, because it's hard for people to act in a way that is trustworthy if you can't give them a degree of opportunity to demonstrate that they can be trusted. And so I think a lot of times, people who are in authority, they think, okay, well, my job is to make sure that people don't steal from me, or they don't cheat the system or whatever. But I think there's a bigger aspect of that. And one of them is being able to align, the vested interest of your employees and your team members with what it is you're trying to accomplish as a company. I'll give you an example. When I worked for a company back east 30 years ago, we had an incentive system in manufacturing where basically everything was department based. And so if you could take, if you had to do 100 units or 100 widgets an hour, and you could do 110, you got 110% of your base pay. Now the challenge was, you didn't know if the quality was there. So we had inspectors that were running around, making sure that, that people were not putting bad products on the, on the conveyor to go to the next department. And then you had expediters that were running around trying to make sure that the right stuff was getting to the right place at the right time so we could get in a box and get it shipped out the door. And it was great, for people who worked in a particular machine or a particular department or even a particular manufacturing plant, but it wasn't necessarily aligned with what the company was trying to achieve. And that was to get product out the door. So you would have massive amounts of inventory build up. You'd have components that were on the shelf and they were missing another component. They couldn't move forward. So the company had asked me to lead a project team to put together a better compensation system. So what we did is we came up with a gain sharing system, and we said, okay, in order to get a product out the door, it should take X number of hours of labor, right? And in order to get out the door, it has to be the right components at the right time. And when it goes out the door, that contributes X number of dollars of value to the compensation pool. So there's a lot of ways that you could enhance it. You could do more of the right thing. You could do better quality. You could make sure that you had fewer hours. You could make sure that the parts were sequenced in the right way. And so now what happened, instead of having small groups of individualized incentives, we now had a unified incentive because it was based on the total number of labor hours that went in and the total amount of output that went out the door. And it took about 6 months for people to embrace it. And a couple of curious things happened. The employee base, or the people that were the line workers, almost became self-regulating, because if someone wasn't contributing their share, the peers basically would kind of ease them out the door. Or if someone was in a situation where they weren't busy, if they didn't want to go work on the production line like a maintenance person, and the preventative maintenance was caught up, and they want to go fishing, they could get hours out of the system. So they could contribute in ways, whether they want to put more hours in, work harder, work faster, or just work less and make money from it. And it was quite a dramatic shift. And I think for leaders and companies and organizations who are worried about whether people are showing up and giving their best, there's probably ways that you can introduce a gain sharing system, a profit sharing system, some type of reward or incentive. But the other aspect of it is that when people don't have the ability to trust their employees, they don't have good systems of measurement, right? Whether it be a login system, whether it be an output system, whether it be a measurement of impact. Without having that, there is a lot of uncertainty. And so a lot of times it's not the employees that are untrustworthy. It's the fact that the measurement systems and the feedback systems that people are operating in and the managers using to measure performance aren't effective. And so I think that's another aspect of where we will be shifting, because we're now giving people more freedom to do what needs to be done any way they want to do it, as long as it creates the outcome that we're looking for in the period of time that we need.
Yeah, well, trust, as we know, plays a massive part, and I think it's I think leaders have to learn how to work with it and sort of understand maybe they need to give the people the right tools, the right equipment. And if there aren't a KPI or a key performance indicator for anyone that doesn't know, I'm sure everyone does know that acronym by now because it's one of these mad ones. As long as they're given the tools, as long as they're given the sort of the respect, and as long as they're going and say, well, show me what you can do. And like, if you do need any help, come back to me and we'll support you. And I think the support network is for what companies should be giving people, especially in this time, and education, learning platforms and whatever, coaches. And that's where sort of I think the trust, the mutual, because people want things and it's not sometimes monetary value. It can be investment in them. And I know for me, that'd be one of my key things. Yeah. So who was your mentor when you was in that space? As I was thinking that, I think someone that inspired you, someone that motivates you, someone that went, wow, that resonates with me. I want to be like that, or on that path.
Yeah, well, I've already kind of indicated my mom, because just for her, who she was and how she raised us and the values that she instilled in us. But I would say they're not famous people. For me, I get inspired by books. I certainly admire great leaders over the years, and I try to learn from the things that other people have done. But most of my, I guess, mentors have been firsthand personal experiences. And I had a manager, and he was two steps. He was a step below being the CEO, and I was kind of the senior person below him. But we got to the point where there was no way for the company to pay me any more money. And there was no opportunity for me to be rewarded, financially. And so one of the things that he offered me was the ability to, for personal development, personal growth, and personal learning. And so they gave me a budget to spend however I felt appropriate to invest in myself. And
wow,
it changed my life and career. But they even went one step further after that, and that is, they knew that I was doing some training work and I was doing some light consulting work outside of the company. And they said, well, look, what if we had you, if we paid you the same money and you could work fewer hours? Would you be okay with that? Would you stay? And I said, yes. And I did. And so what they did is that they gave me an opportunity to work on building my own business and do other things. But instead of having to do it for 50 hours a week, whatever, I was only really obligated to do it 25 to 30 hours a week, as long as I was getting the impact. And so because of that, it showed that, number one, I could be trusted, and there were people that would trust you. Number two, if you could deliver on what you promised to deliver, given the context and the framework that they gave you, you could still be successful. They could benefit, and it really goes across the board. But Jason, I think you've touched on a great point here, and that is, it's difficult, I think, for a lot of leaders to trust their employees, because the employees that they have are probably the employees that they hired and probably the employees that they've had for a long period of time. And culture sometimes can be ingrained. And I think one of the opportunities for people who are affected or displaced, or even if they're not displaced in the work environments now, is that if they can demonstrate that, number one, they can be trusted, number two, that they can contribute, and number three, that they're willing to work more transparently. Because a lot of people don't like when they're being checked up on. They feel like by being measured, they're being mistrusted. But by being able to explain to people that, if you have the ability to be autonomous, or you have the ability to work remotely, not only will we value, your efforts and your contribution probably at a higher level than we would for someone we can't, but other organizations and other companies would value that as well. And personally, for me, if I were looking to hire a team of people, especially if they were lower level or mid-level employees where they weren't managing or measuring, I certainly would look for somebody who's either demonstrated they had the ability to be successful working remotely, or they had the ability to self-manage. And so we talk a lot about leadership, and your podcast is about having very highly effective leaders. But self-leadership, I think, is an underrated skill, and it's an under demanded skill, meaning we don't necessarily require people to demonstrate self-leadership when we hire, because they're like, okay, you don't need to lead yourself. We'll have somebody supervise you, which is not the same thing. You don't have to lead yourself. We have somebody to manage it, which is not the same thing. And so being able to give people the opportunity to exhibit self-leadership and develop self-leadership skills, I think, is vitally important.
I was actually before this, I was writing up about soft leadership in 2020, and some of the points that I came up with was creativity, getting those soft skills in creativity, finding out how people can actually, doesn't matter which department they are from, everyone's got a creative spark and everyone can feed forward back into the organization. That's one of the, and being authentic, persuasive in an integral, authentic way, rather than being I'm going to influence you and brainwash you. Collaboration, adaptability, emotional intelligence. That's and what else? Listening skills. I think there's a lot to be said about listening skills, and it goes on and on and on. I've carried on writing, but one of the final questions for you: what sort of golden nuggets of sort of, if there was a sort of 20-something-year-old person here right now, and they were sort of starting their career, what sort of golden nugget could you give them, or a couple of golden nuggets to accelerate them forward a couple of years?
Yeah, and thank you just for asking that question. I think there are a few things that come to mind. The first one, I guess is to get people to understand, whether you're an employee, whether you work for yourself, whether you're starting a business, if you understand the why, the how becomes a lot easier. Yeah. And so sometimes people, whether they're working in an organization, they're being asked to do something and they're being shown how to do it, but they don't understand the why. Sometimes that can be disincentivizing to people, but also it takes away the opportunity to be creative in many cases. If people understand the why, you can teach them the how, but as long as you can satisfy the why, you might be able to come up with a better how. And so I think, if you're starting out in business, or you're starting to work for yourself, if you understand your why, it's easier to motivate yourself. But also, if you understand the why of the people around you, and give them the freedom, to help create a better how, it allows everyone to be more effective. Now, it doesn't mean that every idea is a golden one. Doesn't mean that every idea can be accepted or implemented. But if people can look at it from a different way and from a different outcome, we have a specific thing that we're trying to do. This is why it's important. And now we can figure out how to get it done, or how to get it done better. And I think, this is forcing people to say, we don't know how to stay in business, but we know why we want to stay in business, right? We've invested things. We don't know how we're going to keep our job, but we know why we want to keep our job. And so we can become very, very creative if we have a strong enough why.
That's absolutely incredible. I really appreciate that. And you've been absolutely phenomenal today. So how can people find out more about you, if they want to find out where to reach you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jace, for asking. I mean, I'm on all the social media platforms. LinkedIn is probably the one, if you wanted to see just from an experience standpoint, the most. But the biggest thing is just to contact me through social media, follow me on social media if they like. And I'm pretty, there's a lot. I've been around a long time, put it that way. So I have a lot over the years that you can find online. So.
That's incredible. Look, I thank you again, and you've been an absolutely wonderful guest. And the reason why I'm doing this is to help people find some really golden nuggets. And I think you've given some people some really valuable tips, information, and stuff for people to learn from, because I'm really up for helping people to learn and grow. So that's another reason for me to do this. So I really thank you. And for all the people out there that are listening in the audio version of this, if you can give us a 5-star rating, that would be very much appreciated. I'll be on iTunes, Spotify, and everything else. So you've been listening to the Mindful Leadership Podcast with Jason Cooper and my very, very special guest, Spike Hummer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity.